There is nothing worse than finishing your first ever PC build, or really any PC build, pressing the power button only to find out that nothing happens. This can be caused by a variety of circumstances, but usually it is only a pinched wire or a misplaced cable. And troubleshooting can be very difficult if you've already installed your new PC into the case, neatly wired everything, got everything just right, and then even attached the side panel. You may have to pull the entire board back out, pull the GPU off, pull the CPU off, just to find out what's wrong. But this can all be curbed, and troubleshooting can be greatly decreased if you build your PC outside of the case first. It's easier to get to all the wires and knickknacks throughout the motherboard and throughout your parts. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to and discuss the importance of partially building your computer before you ever build it into the case. This video is a part of a larger series, and you can check out the full playlist in the YouTube cards above. I'm going to walk you through the entire process and give you everything you need to build your very own video editing PC. We're going to talk about how to pick your parts, how to prepare for your build, building the computer, and how to get it up and running. If you want to check out all the parts or related videos I'm discussing in this video, and if you want to skip ahead to certain parts of this video, there are timestamps in the description below. Also, concerning those links, remember, if you do make a purchase through any of those links, I will get a small commission, but at no extra cost to you. And that actually keeps this channel alive and the helpful content coming your way. All right, so now we're gonna go ahead and jump right into building the PC. And the first thing we wanna do is come over here and get our CPU. Now, the cool thing about the CPU is that it's pretty easy to mount, because if you look here in the corner, you have this arrow right here, and that's gonna line up with the arrow on the motherboard. So we'll come on over here to the motherboard, and we're gonna drop the motherboard down in here. So you simply just lift that hinge up. And then as you see right down in here, it may be a little difficult to see, but there's also an arrow on the motherboard. So what you want to do is you want to line up the arrow on the CPU with the arrow on the motherboard. So then we'll just set it down in there, and you don't take force with this. You just set it nice and light. It should fall right into place. And then we'll go ahead and drop the hinge down, and that'll lock it into place. So the CPU is now in place. And the next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and put the RAM into place. Now, these are slightly different in length from each side. So what I want to do is make sure I'm lining up the RAM so that the slots line up correctly. So right there, as you can see, that's not correct because they're not lining up. So I'm going to flip it over. And then there, the two slots are lining up. Now, check your manual on your motherboard to make sure that you are putting in the right slot configuration. Most want you to put them in separate. So for instance, I think this is A2 and B2. That's the configuration that my motherboard wants me to put my RAM sticks in. And so you just set them in and then just give them a good push and lock them into place. So now we have our RAM in. All right, the next thing that I want to do is go ahead and put my drives in place. So we're using the Kingston KC 2500. This is going to be our boot drive, and then we'll use a 1 terabyte Kingston KC 2500 for our storage. And if you want to learn more about like how to set up and structure the right storage configuration, I'm going to do a full video on that, about the 3 drive setup that I recommend for the most efficient and fastest video editing possible. But for now, we're just going to go ahead and install our boot drive into the motherboard. Now, this is really nice because whenever you get your motherboard, into the case, this becomes very difficult. So this is not necessary for testing your PC. You don't have to put your drives in. But since it's already out of the case, the motherboard, it makes it much easier to go ahead and put your drives in now rather than waiting till it's in your case. Because to do this, when you are in the midst of having your motherboard in the case, here's our little magnetic screwdriver, so handy. When you're in the midst of having it in the case, all this becomes very difficult. So I always recommend dropping these drives in if you're using M.2 drives while you're actually outside of the case, because then that's one step that's already complete. All right, So I'm going to go ahead and pop this off here. Okay, now you're going to use standoffs, and most likely your motherboard came with these little standoffs. Let me show you. They're the silver ones right here. So you can see the silver standoffs in there. Those are what you're going to put onto your motherboard in order to set your drives onto it. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my standoff, and I'm going to put my M.2 drive, which goes right in here on the motherboard. So we got one right here, and then we have one right here. Okay, so those are our two drivers are going. But I want to put this in first because I want to see where my standoff needs to go. There's a variety of places you could put your standoff. So it looks like my standoff's going to go right there. So I'm going to pull that back out, set that down there, and then, I already forgot. Okay, second one, cool. Or third one, technically. My iFixit kit comes with a standoff screwdriver, but you don't have to have one. It's not the biggest deal in the world. You can just tighten that down, finger tension, and then go ahead and put that drive back in there, just like so. Grab your standoff screw, which comes with your motherboard packaging, that little silver screw, and then we're going to drop this one right down in here. As we're going through this video, if you're getting some value, go down and press that like button and let me know in the comment section what you plan on using your PC build for. All right, so you'll repeat that same process for putting in the second drive. So I'm going to go ahead and do that real quick, and then we'll keep moving forward. So we're doing a KC 2500, 500 gigabyte for our boot drive, and then we're doing a KC 2500, 1 terabyte for our storage drive. And like I said, if you want to know like further how to better configure your setup, we will do a future video about that. But this is trying to put us within the $1,500 budget of this build. All right, now that our drives are in place, we're going to drop the heat shields and the fan cover. Oh, we got to do this first. What am I talking about? Put this on. Go. We'll drop our fan cover back on there. And like I said, these little metallic plates, the magnetic plates are amazing. So picking up a set of those on Amazon for like, I think it was $16. I mean, you can basically just toss your screws at these plates and it just makes it so easy to go ahead and use those. So I've got all my parts already set out for the build. And that's something I also recommend doing is kind of getting all your parts divided out. It'll make your build go slightly faster, which is always a bonus. All right, the next thing we're going to go ahead and do is install the motherboard. Not the motherboard, this is the motherboard. We're going to go, next thing we're going to do is install the CPU fan. And we're using the DarkRock Pro 4 for this. And so the first thing we have to do according to our instruction manual, which is right over here. So always make sure these are handy and ready because every PC build could be slightly different, depending on the motherboard, depending on the fan you use, even the case. So always have your instruction manuals ready to reference because, you know, if you got all the parts I got, awesome. You're following along. You're doing the exact same thing I'm doing. But if you have a slightly different part, that can be a different experience. All right, so next we're moving forward. I'm going to go ahead and take these mounts off. I don't need these for my build for this CPU cooler. So I'm going to go ahead and take these off, and then I'm going to go ahead and install the standoffs that come with the DarkRock Pro 4. So just go ahead and pop these off here. Okay. Go. Like I said, you can literally just toss these guys right over there. All right, now we're going to get our standoffs here. So these are the standoffs we're going to use for our CPU cooler. So I'm going to go ahead and put these little washers, basically, or spacers, and those are going to set down right on top of the motherboard right there. So I put one there. I'm going to go ahead and put one right there. So from there, I take the mount and I'm going to place it down on top of there, just like so. I'm going to get that one tightened down just so we have one in place, so it's not going all over the place. And then we'll take our second one and we'll drop it right down in there. There we go. And again, when it comes to some of these things, these are not, you don't want to force these down. Just do like a nice finger tension. So as tight as you can do it with 2 fingers, that's going to be plenty. All right, so that's in place. Now I'm going to go ahead and do the other side. I'm going to hold all this together. That way it just kind of drops in there. There we go. We'll go ahead and tighten that one down. Tighten that one down. All right, perfect. Now I'm going to check and make sure that that's the correct spacing. Perfect. All right. So now that that is in place, we need to go ahead and apply some thermal paste before we put our CPU cooler on. There's a lot of controversy around how much thermal paste you should apply and what pattern, but what I found most common is a pea-sized dot in the middle of your CPU. That's what Arctic recommends. That's what a lot of other PC builders recommend. And as far as my experience, every time I've applied a pea-sized dot and then I've gone ahead, put it down, and then pulled it off later to do some maintenance on the build, I found that it's like nearly perfectly spread across the CPU. So let's go ahead and apply our pea-sized dot here to the CPU. Should be about good right there. And then this always kind of gets stringy, so I just kind of roll it so it doesn't go everywhere. All right, so that looks good. Okay, so what we're going to do is now we're going to place this CPU cooler onto the motherboard. Now, when the CPU cooler is sitting on the motherboard, we want it to be facing across. We want the word to be obviously level and we can read it when it's in the case. The motherboard's going to sit in the case like so, which means the CPU cooler needs to be placed in like this, lining up our mounting brackets in the correct place. So I'm going to go ahead and set this on here. Go. That looks good. All right, now we're going to take our mounting screws, which are right here, and luckily Be Quiet sends you with this fantastic screwdriver that fits down right in these holes. So what we want to do is we want to pull these off just like this. And this is going to allow us to access the mounting bracket down in there. So if you want to look right down in here, you can see that we're putting the screws down into place. There we go. All right, there's one. And I'm going to go ahead and tighten that up more once I finish mounting this side. Okay, so I haven't tightened down the CPU cooler yet because if you look, it's like tilting at an angle and it's bumping up against here. So right here, it's bumping up against our RAM slots. It's because the fan is too far down. So what we need to do is we need to pull this fan off right here, just like so. And this is something that you would most likely want to check out before you get it onto the CPU, but I just want to show you that it's okay to sometimes not do everything in the absolutely correct order. These are things that you have to, work with as you're going through your build. So what I want to do is pop this fan off like so, and then we're going to mount that fan back on in a second. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to tighten down the rest of the way because we want the CPU to lay nice and flat. Or the CPU cooler, excuse me. And now that looks spot on. Okay, so just a finger's tension again for the CPU cooler. There we go. And perfect. All right. So now I can go ahead and mount these back on since we're not going to be doing any more tightening or loosening with the CPU cooler. And then we're going to put this fan back on. And we always want to make sure that the airflow is correct. So there's, if you see on the top, this might be a little difficult to see, but there's these little tabs right there, the arrows. It shows us which way the airflow is going. So I'll kind of wiggle it around just in case the lighting, you need to see it. So that means the airflow is going to be going this way. We want the airflow going through the CPU cooler, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and check the arrows. So the arrows look good. I'm going to set my CPU fan a little bit higher because our RAM sticks sit up a little bit there. So we'll go right about there. And then I take these little curly Q brackets, well, maybe not curly Q brackets, but these little brackets, and I'm going to mount it up near the top of there. There. See how that does? That's perfect. Okay, good. Take my other bracket, these little funky guys, and put one there, and put that on the highest setting up top here. All right, now it looks all good. Now, this is another big reason why building outside of the case is important, because if I got this in and it was in the case and then I realized, oh man, I didn't put my RAM in yet, how am I going to get it in there? You got to literally you got to finagle your whole CPU cooler out of the motherboard, off the motherboard, out of the case. And so by building it outside, you can really work through and troubleshoot these issues. But you're building right along with me, so we don't run into that. Also, another huge bonus of building outside of the case is you can leave this on once you finish testing. Now, if you have an AIO, you will not be able to do that because you're going to have to mount the AIO into the case, the radiator part, and then you'll go ahead and then reattach it. So some people choose to not test because if you go ahead and you put the AIO on, test, you're going to have to pull it off. You're going to have to clean the CPU and the heat sink on the AIO because you'll have all that thermal paste on there. So that's why some people choose to skip doing this test build. But if you're using an air cooler, there's literally no reason not to test your build because it is so much easier to build it outside of the case. All right, last thing we're going to do here is put this fan on. Again, we want to make sure airflow is going through. So we're going to have our arrow pointing this way. All right, now that we've placed the middle fan into the CPU cooler here, we're going to go ahead and take these curly Q brackets again, attach them on, and mount this one up so it is cooling our CPU. So we're pulling air through the CPU. We're pulling air through the heat sink across the CPU. There we go. We'll mount that one there and there. And on the other side, we'll do the same thing. All right. So now that that is in place, we are good to go. All right, the next thing we're going to want to place onto our motherboard is our GPU. Now, if you look here, this one here is very close to my CPU cooler. So in order to get this one off, it is very difficult to get your hand down in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mount it to this one just for the test's sake. That way I can pop it off very easily. And you want to make sure that your motherboard is hanging off the edge of your box here. That way this motherboard, this case mount doesn't keep it from setting incorrectly to the motherboard. So go ahead and drop that down in there, slide it over a little bit, and then just push it into place. Good to go. All right, now the final step is to get some of these wiring hooked up. So Be Quiet has provided us with this splitter. So we'll go ahead and hook the splitter, and then we'll drop the CPU fans into the CPU. So you see we have our CPU pump header right here, and we'll just drop that right onto there. All right, so now our fans are hooked up, and those will be good once we get power to the unit. And that is all you need to do to test your PC. You need your graphics card, your CPU, your cooler, your RAM, but you don't need your storage drives. But like I said, I did that because it's just ease of installation. Now it's literally done. I just have to put it into my computer. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and hook up the power supply. We want to make sure we have our CPU, which looks like that. We want to have our PCIe or VGA, depending on your power supply manufacturer. This will either be VGA or it'll be PCIe. And then this one comes with the main motherboard cable already connected to the power supply. Now we're going to go ahead and connect the main ATX connector to the motherboard here. So I'm going to get those lined up. It's a little finicky there. There we go. That's plugged in. Now I'm going to do the CPU. So we'll plug it in here. To our 4-pin connector. And the CPU is actually going to be up top here, but I'll spin this around for y'all. All right, so next we're going to plug in our CPU right here. And we'll just drop that right down into there. And the last cable we have to do is our graphics card. So plug this into one of the PCIe slots on the back of the power supply, just like so. And then we only need one of these. So we take this one. It's a 2-pin, 6-pin configuration, and we drop that right onto the GPU. Perfect. All right, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pull up the screen, because now we're going to see if we can get a post. That's the goal of this entire setup in testing our components, is we want to get a post, and that means that it boots up into the BIOS. That is super important. So I'm going to go ahead and pull my screen up here. This is not necessary. They've plugged in screens before. Maybe they haven't. It's like me, and I just thought I want to build a computer. Okay, true.
I'm going to save some money and build a computer.
Yep, that's true.
Screen? What's a screen?
What's a screen? I've never heard of a screen before.
Julia decides she wants to build her computer.
Oh goodness, that would be interesting.
She probably need a computer first.
Right? You need a computer to build a computer. Okay, so now that we have our screen, and I'd like to thank Acer, this is the Concept D CM2. So 100% color accurate, sRGB, Adobe RGB, and I believe it's 96% DCI-P3. So a very good screen, very decent price. I think this one's around $400. So if you're looking for a monitor, this is definitely going to be your go-to. All right, we're going to take this and plug it into our GPU here, like so. And then I'm going to come around here, click on the power for the power supply. And as you see, we now have RGB lighting taking place on the motherboard. That's a very good sign, okay? Okay, so now that we have the RGB lighting on the motherboard, that means that we're getting power and things are working. But we need to make sure that we can actually power on the computer, so through the motherboard, and get a post to the screen. Once we see that, we know that we're good to go and build in our PC, or into our case. Now, some motherboards come with a power button. You basically just come over, click the power button, and it turns on. But this one does not. And that's not a bad thing. It's just, that's the way this one was built. But you can easily do a Jumpstart. Now, what a Jumpstart is, if you come around here, I'll show you. You're going to connect the negative and positive pins on the motherboard. And that's going to go ahead and just jumpstart your PC. So it's going to be right around here. And as you see, our fan's kicked on. Things are rolling. And let's see if we get a post. All right. And we're in. Okay, so now that we've built our PC outside of the case, we've gotten a post in the BIOS, you are one step closer to having that computer ready to go for your video editing. Now, the next step is to go ahead and click into the next video, and we're gonna get started actually building our PC into the case. So thank you guys so much for hanging on in this video, and I'll see you guys here on the next one.